What would you do if you knew there was a place in the United States where more than 30 people have simply disappeared over the past 6 decades, leaving behind desperate families and utterly baffled investigators? Mount Shasta, California, rises majestically to 4,222 meters above sea level as one of the most iconic and mysterious mountains on the American West Coast, attracting thousands of visitors annually seeking spiritual experiences, outdoor adventures, and connection with one of the country's most impressive geological formations. But behind the stunning beauty and reputation as a sacred site revered by indigenous cultures for millennia, Mount Shasta holds a dark secret that local authorities prefer not to discuss publicly. Since 1960, more than 30 people have disappeared without a trace in the region, creating a pattern statistically impossible to explain as simple coincidence or bad luck in outdoor activities. What is most disturbing about these disappearances is not just the number, but the profile of the people who were never found again. Most were experienced travelers, veteran hikers, and even local guides who knew the terrain, trails, and dangers of the mountain intimately. These were not inexperienced people who ventured unprepared into unknown territory. They were skilled individuals who possessed adequate equipment, local knowledge, and sufficient experience to safely navigate the challenges that Mount Shasta presents. Have you ever experienced that unsettling feeling of knowing that something is deeply wrong with a place, even when you can't quite pinpoint why? That's exactly the atmosphere that permeates discussions about Mount Shasta when the topic of disappearances comes up in conversations with local residents, search and rescue teams, and authorities working in the region. In July 2023, 3 simultaneous cases shocked both the local community and federal investigators when security cameras on trails and in parking lots recorded the final moments of people who simply vanished from the face of the earth. Thomas Rivera, a mountain guide with 15 years of experience, Sarah Kim, a geologist who had studied Mount Shasta for over a decade, and Marcus Johnson, a nature photographer who knew every trail on the mountain, all disappeared during the same week under circumstances that defied any conventional explanation. What makes these July 2023 cases even more perplexing is that, for the first time in the history of disappearances on Mount Shasta, investigators had access to modern surveillance technology that documented the final moments before each person simply vanished. The images show individuals walking normally along familiar trails with no signs of stress, pursuit, or any indication that they were facing imminent danger. Stay with me until the end, because forensic analysis of these recordings has revealed aspects of the disappearances on Mount Shasta that have forced authorities to reopen investigations into cases that had been shelved for decades. More importantly, the events of July 2023 confirmed suspicions that independent researchers had developed about specific patterns in the disappearances that transcended conventional explanations of accidents during outdoor activities. Mount Shasta is not just a mountain, it's a phenomenon that defies our understanding of how people can simply disappear in the 21st century, leaving behind equipment, vehicles, and families that will never find closure. The mountain's spiritual reputation attracts seekers from around the world, but few visitors are aware that they are entering territory where normal rules of safety and probability seem not to apply. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because the disappearances in Mount Shasta follow patterns that suggest something far more complex than isolated accidents or conventional crimes. Each case adds another piece to a puzzle that has baffled investigators for over 60 years, creating a sinister reputation that the local tourism industry is actively working to suppress. The mountain, which should represent spiritual transcendence and connection with nature, has become a symbol of inexplicable mystery and irreparable loss for dozens of families who continue to search for answers that may never come. Now let's explore exactly what makes Mount Shasta a magnet for unexplained phenomena, why this particular mountain has developed a reputation that transcends its natural beauty, and how a geological formation can become the epicenter of so many unsolved human mysteries. But before we delve into the unique characteristics that make Mount Shasta unlike any other American mountain, I need to share something important with you. When I began researching this case, I realized we're dealing with a phenomenon that goes far beyond statistics on mountain accidents. We're exploring a mystery that touches on fundamental questions about our understanding of how people can simply disappear in places that should be safe and monitored. If this topic resonates with you, if you've also wondered about these places that seem to attract inexplicable mysteries, leave a comment below about what has resonated with you so far. Have you ever visited Mount Shasta, or do you know of other places with similar reputations? Or perhaps you have your own theory about why certain mountains seem to be magnets for disappearances. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of investigative content that honors both the victims and the families who continue to search for answers. And look, if you're feeling that unease I felt when I first discovered the extent of the disappearances on Mount Shasta and realize we're dealing with a pattern that transcends coincidence, click the like button below. It shows me I'm on the right track, bringing up mysteries that truly matter and that can help keep alive the pressure for deeper investigations into these phenomena that defy conventional explanation. If you want to continue exploring these mysterious places with me, where natural beauty hides dark secrets, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because I can guarantee that Mount Shasta will reveal aspects of unexplained disappearances that go far beyond mountain accidents. And I have other cases of places where people simply vanished, leaving behind more questions than answers. It is this conscious and engaged community that we have built together that makes it possible for me to dedicate weeks investigating every detail, talking to search and rescue experts, and above all, keeping alive the memory of people like Thomas, Sarah, and Marcus as we search for patterns that can explain the inexplicable. Mount Shasta rises like a dormant volcano dominating the Northern California skyline, but its unique features extend far beyond its impressive height and scenic beauty. The mountain possesses geological, magnetic, and atmospheric properties that set it apart from other mountain formations, creating environmental conditions that some researchers believe could affect both electronic equipment and human orientation in ways not yet fully understood. Mount Shasta's spiritual reputation is not modern tourist marketing, but a millennia-old tradition dating back to indigenous cultures who considered the mountain sacred long before the arrival of Europeans. Local tribes developed specific legends about the mountain that included warnings about areas where people could get lost between worlds, descriptions that, when analyzed through modern lenses, surprisingly correspond to the locations where the most contemporary disappearances have been recorded. Mount Shasta's transformation from a spiritual destination to an epicenter of unexplained mysteries didn't happen overnight, but evolved through decades of events that gradually created a reputation that transcends its natural beauty. The mountain attracts over 500,000 visitors annually, including conventional hikers, spiritual seekers who believe in its mystical properties, and researchers interested in its unique geological features, which include volcanic formations, anomalous magnetic fields, and atmospheric conditions that can affect electronic equipment. The impact of the numbers related to disappearances on Mount Shasta becomes truly disturbing when compared to statistics from other American mountains of similar profile. While formations like Mount Rainier, Mount Hood, or Mount Whitney register an average of 1 to 2 disappearances per year, numbers consistent with predictable accidents in mountaineering activities, Mount Shasta documents a disappearance rate that is statistically impossible to explain through conventional risk factors. A journey through official records reveals that since 1960, when systematic documentation began, the mountain has recorded an average of 0.5 disappearances per year, a number that may seem low until you consider that most of these people were never found, either alive or dead. In comparison, other mountains of the same category find approximately 80% of missing persons within 72 hours, either through successful rescues or recovery of bodies in fatal cases. The hidden truth about what makes Mount Shasta different from other at-risk areas lies in characteristics that transcend conventional geography. The mountain possesses natural magnetic fields that are significantly more intense than similar formations, a result of its unique geological composition, which includes high concentrations of conductive minerals and underground volcanic structures that create unusual electromagnetic conditions. A scientific approach applied to the anomalies of Mount Shasta revealed that navigation equipment, including compasses, GPS, and communication devices, frequently exhibit erratic behavior in specific areas of the mountain. Even more disturbing, these technological dead spots correspond precisely to the areas where the most people have disappeared over the decades, suggesting a correlation between electromagnetic interference and human vulnerability. Behind the scenes, the official stance on the disappearances reveals a careful minimization strategy that balances legal transparency with economic concerns about local tourism. Authorities in Siskiyou County, where Mount Shasta is located, publicly acknowledge that the mountain presents unique challenges for search and rescue operations, but avoid detailed discussion of standards that could discourage visitation. The revelations about why local authorities avoid discussing standards include pressure from commercial interests that depend on the spiritual and adventure tourism that Mount Shasta attracts. The local economy generates approximately $50 million annually through activities related to the mountain, including lodging, guides, equipment, and spiritual events that attract people from all over the world. The official decision not to publish detailed statistics on disappearances also reflects a recognition that some aspects of the Mount Shasta phenomenon transcend current scientific explanation. Authorities prefer to focus on safety recommendations and emergency protocols rather than acknowledge that certain aspects of the mountain remain genuinely mysterious. The transformation in public perception about Mount Shasta happened gradually as families of missing persons began to connect and share information that revealed patterns that authorities were not publicly discussing. Through social networks and specialized forums, a collective understanding emerged that the disappearances followed specific characteristics that transcended statistical coincidence. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the three simultaneous cases of July 2023 provided, for the first time, visual and technological evidence documenting the final moments before people disappeared, revealing aspects of the Mount Shasta phenomenon that have forced investigators to reconsider conventional theories about what really happens on that mountain. Comment below. Mount Shasta is different if you're also noticing that the unique characteristics of this mountain, from anomalous magnetic fields to its mystical reputation, create conditions that transcend the normal risks of outdoor activities and suggest something genuinely extraordinary happening there. The three simultaneous cases in July 2023 provided, for the first time, visual and technological evidence documenting the final moments before people disappeared, revealing aspects of the Mount Shasta phenomenon that forced investigators to reconsider conventional theories about what really happens on that mountain. The transformation in understanding these disappearances occurred when authorities realized they were not dealing with isolated cases, but with coordinated events that took place during a single week in July that would become known as the week that changed everything in Mount Shasta investigations. The impact of the three simultaneous disappearances was profound, not only because of the number, but also because of the quality of the people involved and the unprecedented amount of evidence that was recorded before each disappearance. Thomas Rivera, 34, was a certified high-altitude mountaineering guide who had led more than 200 expeditions on Mount Shasta over a 15-year career. Sarah Kim, a 31-year-old geologist, had dedicated more than a decade to specifically studying the unique characteristics of Mount Shasta, including its magnetic anomalies and subterranean volcanic formations. Marcus Johnson, a 28-year-old professional nature photographer, knew every trail, every view, and every danger of the mountain through hundreds of photographic expeditions. The journey through the victims' profiles revealed people who represented the exact opposite of inexperienced, tourists or careless adventurers who might get lost due to human error or lack of preparation. Thomas held certifications in mountain rescue, wilderness first aid, and advanced navigation. Sarah had published academic papers on the specific geology of Mount Shasta and was a regular consultant for search and rescue operations in the region. Marcus had photographed the mountain in all weather conditions and seasons, developing intimate knowledge of changing weather patterns, seasonal hazards, and safe routes. The hidden truth about why such experienced people got lost emerged when investigators analyzed the specific circumstances of each disappearance. All three had planned routine activities in areas they knew perfectly well. Thomas was leading a family group on a trail considered easy. Sarah was collecting geological samples in an area where she had worked dozens of times, and Marcus was photographing the sunrise at a spot he had visited regularly for years. The investigative mindset had to adapt when they realized that the disappearances did not follow typical patterns of mountain accidents or gradual disorientation. In each case, witnesses reported that the victims were behaving normally until moments before they simply vanished. There were no signs of stress, confusion, or indications that they were facing any kind of emergency or perceived danger. The behind-the-scenes technological evidence that was preserved included, for the first time in the history of the disappearances on Mount Shasta, recordings from security cameras installed at strategic points along the main trails. These cameras, installed by the Forest Service in 2022 as part of a wildlife monitoring program, inadvertently captured the final moments of each victim before their disappearances. The most disturbing revelations came from forensic analysis of the recordings, which showed behavior that defied logical explanation. Thomas was seen walking normally with his family when he suddenly stopped, stared intently at an area of the forest where nothing visible was present, and then simply walked towards the dense vegetation, abandoning his group without a word. Sarah was working with geological equipment when she abruptly stopped her activities, dropped her tools, and began walking purposefully towards an area that her own research had documented as inaccessible and dangerous. The family's decision to authorize a detailed analysis of the recordings revealed even more disconcerting aspects. Marcus, known for his obsessive caution with expensive photographic equipment, simply abandoned thousands of dollars worth of equipment in the middle of a photo shoot and began walking uphill, completely ignoring the shouts of other photographers who were working in the area. The shift in the official investigative approach occurred when authorities recognized that the recordings documented behavior that transcended conventional categories of accidents, medical problems, or even psychological crises. The behavior demonstrated by the three victims suggested some kind of compulsion or external influence that had caused them to abandon normal activities and deliberately walk toward dangerous areas. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the systematic analysis of all disappearances on Mount Shasta over the past 6 decades has revealed specific patterns that transcend coincidence and suggest that something consistent and predictable is operating on that mountain, something that may explain why experienced people repeatedly make decisions that result in their disappearances. Systematic analysis of all disappearances on Mount Shasta over the past 6 decades has revealed specific patterns that transcend coincidence and suggest that something consistent and predictable is operating on that mountain, something that may explain why experienced people repeatedly make decisions that result in their disappearances. The transformation in understanding these events occurred when independent researchers began systematically mapping not only where and when people disappeared, but who these people were and what characteristics they shared that might have made them vulnerable to some specific phenomenon. The impact of demographic analysis of the victims revealed disturbing patterns that transcended statistical chance. Approximately 70% of the people who disappeared on Mount Shasta were professionals with higher education, particularly those with backgrounds in science, engineering, or technical fields. More significantly, about 60% had prior experience in outdoor activities and specific knowledge of Mount Shasta through previous visits or professional work in the region. The journey through the temporal analysis of the disappearances revealed even more disconcerting correlations related to specific times and weather conditions. More than 80% of the disappearances occurred during a 6-hour period between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., times that correspond to peak tourist activity, but also to specific atmospheric conditions that include greater intensity of solar radiation and stability of the mountain's natural magnetic fields. The hidden truth about weather conditions revealed that disappearances preferentially occurred during periods of high atmospheric pressure, clear skies, and low humidity. precisely the conditions most people would consider ideal for outdoor activities. This correlation was the opposite of what would be expected if the disappearances were the result of weather-related accidents, where adverse conditions would increase the risk of disorientation or medical emergencies. The investigative mindset had to adapt when detailed geographical analysis revealed that the disappearances were concentrated in 3 specific areas of the mountain that shared unique geological characteristics. These hot spots represented less than 15% of the total accessible area of Mount Shasta, but were responsible for more than 75% of all documented disappearances over 6 decades. Behind-the-scenes geological analysis of these specific areas revealed fascinating correlations between disappearances and subterranean mountain features. The 3 zones were located directly above volcanic formations that created significantly more intense localized magnetic fields than other areas. Even more disturbing, these areas also corresponded to locations where historical indigenous cultures had established cultural restrictions, considering them portals through which people could cross over to other worlds. The most disconcerting revelations came from analyzing the behavior of sniffer dogs during search and rescue operations. In over 90% of cases, trained dogs were able to follow victims' trails to specific points within the 3 hot zones where they invariably lost the trail completely. Even more extraordinary, these loss-of-trail points were consistent. Different dogs, in different cases over different decades, stopped sniffing within the same square meter of territory. The decision to precisely map these points of lost tracking revealed that they corresponded exactly to locations where electronic equipment was malfunctioning. Compasses spun uncontrollably, GPS devices lost signal, and communication equipment showed significant interference, all indicators of intense electromagnetic fields that could be affecting both equipment and potentially animal and human neurology. The shift in scientific approach included collaboration with neuroscience experts who investigated whether intense magnetic fields could affect human behavior through direct influence on the brain. Preliminary research suggested that exposure to specific magnetic fields could potentially affect brain regions responsible for spatial orientation, decision-making, and even compulsive behavior. The most unsettling evidence regarding behavioral patterns included consistent accounts from survivors who had experienced episodes of disorientation in the hot zones, but managed to resist the compulsion to keep walking. These survivors described sensations of being called or pulled toward specific areas, accompanied by alterations in temporal and spatial perception that made it difficult to maintain normal orientation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because attempts by experts to scientifically explain the patterns observed at Mount Shasta lead us to confront fundamental questions about the limits of current science and the possibility that some natural phenomena still transcend our understanding of how magnetic fields, geology, and human neurobiology can interact in ways that produce genuinely extraordinary effects. Comment below. Patterns are very specific. If you're also noticing that the correlations between victim types, specific times, weather conditions, and precise geographic areas are statistically impossible to explain as coincidence and suggest that something systematic is influencing human behavior in those locations. The attempts by experts to scientifically explain the patterns observed on Mount Shasta lead us to confront fundamental questions about the limits of current science and the possibility that some natural phenomena still transcend our understanding of how magnetic fields, geology, and human neurobiology can interact in ways that produce genuinely extraordinary effects. The transformation in the scientific approach to the Mount Shasta Mystery occurred when researchers realized that conventional explanations for mountain disorientation could not accommodate the specificity and consistency of the patterns observed over 6 decades. The impact of detailed geological analysis revealed that Mount Shasta possesses unique subterranean features that distinguish it from other volcanic formations. The mountain is built upon a complex network of magma chambers, fossilized lava tunnels, and mineral deposits that create electromagnetic conditions unparalleled in other American mountains. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a geophysicist at the University of California, explained that The subterranean formations of Mount Shasta create a geometry of magnetic fields that is fundamentally different from any other mountain we have studied. The journey through research on anomalous magnetic fields revealed that the three hotspots where people disappear possess magnetic intensities that are 300–500% higher than the normal magnetic background of the region. More significantly, these fields are not static, but oscillate in cyclical patterns that correspond to factors such as solar activity, atmospheric pressure, and even lunar phases, variables that could explain why disappearances preferentially occur during specific conditions. The hidden truth about how intense magnetic fields can affect human behavior emerges from neurological research that has demonstrated that exposure to specific magnetic fields can influence brain regions responsible for spatial navigation, decision-making, and even perceptual experiences. Dr. Robert Chen, a neuroscientist specializing in the effects of electromagnetic fields, observed that sufficiently intense magnetic fields can theoretically create altered states of consciousness that include behavioral compulsions and severe disorientation. Mainstream scientific thinking initially resisted connections between magnetic fields and human disappearances, but accumulating evidence has forced recognition that electromagnetic phenomena can produce neurological effects that transcend our current understanding. Controlled studies have demonstrated that volunteers exposed to magnetic fields similar to those found on Mount Shasta experienced measurable changes in brain activity, including spatial confusion and, in some cases, directed compulsive behavior. The underlying explanations for paranormal phenomena include indigenous traditions that predated modern scientific discoveries by centuries. The Wintu tribe, who considered Mount Shasta sacred, developed detailed legends about invisible pathways on the mountain where people could cross between worlds. Even more extraordinary, these legends included specific geographical descriptions that correspond precisely to the three hot zones identified by modern research. Revelations about historical indigenous knowledge include specific warnings about behaviors people should avoid in certain areas of the mountain. Oral traditions described symptoms that surprisingly correspond to neurological effects of exposure to intense magnetic fields, disorientation, directional compulsions, and alterations in time perception. Elder Mary Potts of the Wintu tribe explained that our ancestors knew that certain areas of the mountain could call people, and they developed protocols to avoid these influences. The decision to integrate indigenous knowledge with modern scientific research has yielded insights that no single approach could achieve in isolation. Legends about dimensional portals may be culturally specific descriptions of electromagnetic phenomena that produce real neurological effects, while scientific research provides mechanisms that explain how ancestral traditions could be based on accurate observations of genuine natural phenomena. The shift in attitude among search and rescue specialists reflected a gradual recognition that Mount Shasta presented challenges that transcended conventional protocols. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, who coordinated rescue operations in the region for 15 years, admitted that there's something about Mount Shasta that we can't fully explain. We lose tracks in ways that simply don't happen on other mountains, and we have patterns of victim behavior that don't fit into normal wilderness emergency categories. The most compelling evidence for scientific explanations includes documentation showing that electronic equipment exhibits predictable malfunctions in hot zones, validating theories about intense electromagnetic fields. However, aspects of the disappearances, including the complete absence of physical traces and the victim's compulsive behavior, continue to defy explanation through known scientific mechanisms. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because analysis of official investigations conducted over decades has revealed both the extraordinary resources employed in attempting to solve these mysteries and the fundamental limitations investigators faced when conventional methods proved inadequate for phenomena that transcend normal categories of emergency or crime. Analysis of official investigations conducted over decades has revealed both the extraordinary resources employed in attempting to solve these mysteries and the fundamental limitations investigators faced when conventional methods proved inadequate for phenomena that transcend normal categories of emergency or crime. The transformation in the official approach to Mount Shasta occurred when federal authorities recognized that the disappearances represented a statistically anomalous pattern that justified specialized resources and protocols that went far beyond conventional search and rescue operations. The impact of the resources employed in searches over decades has been impressive in both scale and technological sophistication. Since 1960, more than $12 million has been spent on specific search operations for Mount Shasta, including the use of specialized mountain helicopters, teams of search dogs specifically trained for high-altitude conditions, advanced thermal technology, and even experiments with drones equipped with electromagnetic sensors to map the region's magnetic anomalies. The journey through the search records revealed that investigators had employed virtually every available technology to locate missing persons, including methods normally reserved for military or intelligence operations. Reconnaissance satellites were redirected to photograph specific areas, sonar systems were used to investigate underground caves, and electronic warfare experts were consulted about the possibility of technological interference affecting the victims' communication equipment. The hidden truth about evidence found during decades of searching was that it created more questions than answers. Investigators discovered personal belongings of the victims in locations that were physically impossible to reach without specialized climbing equipment, often in pristine condition, despite exposure to the elements for months or years. Even more disturbing, some items were found buried under layers of soil that required years to form naturally, suggesting they had been placed there long before the corresponding disappearances. The investigative mindset had to adapt when patterns of evidence challenged fundamental assumptions about how missing persons and their belongings should behave in the natural environment. Clothing was found neatly folded in areas where the victims had never been. Electronic equipment continued to function despite months of exposure to the elements, and footprints appeared and disappeared without logical continuity, as if people had teleported between locations. The development of special protocols for Mount Shasta involved official recognition that the mountain presented unique challenges requiring adaptation of standard procedures. The Shasta Special protocol was developed in collaboration with experts in anomalous phenomena and included procedures such as avoiding certain areas during specific conditions, using electromagnetic monitoring equipment to detect anomalies, and implementing special communication protocols for teams operating in the hot zones. The revelations about why some areas are considered dead zones emerged when investigators recognized that certain parts of the mountain presented characteristics that made search operations not only difficult, but potentially dangerous for the rescue teams themselves. These areas were designated as dead zones, not only because people disappeared there, but because navigation equipment consistently failed, communications were interrupted, and even experienced members of search teams reported episodes of severe disorientation. The decision to officially classify certain areas as dead zones was controversial because it effectively admitted that there were parts of American territory where authorities could not guarantee safety or operational effectiveness. However, after several incidents where rescue team members experienced problems similar to those of the original victims, including temporal disorientation and directional compulsions, protocols were established that limited access to these areas except under very specific conditions. The transformation in search protocols included the development of unconventional techniques that incorporated both scientific knowledge and indigenous traditions. Teams began working with members of the Wintu tribe who possessed ancestral knowledge about safe mountain navigation, and protocols were established to monitor electromagnetic conditions before authorizing search operations in sensitive areas. The most frustrating evidence for investigators included cases where all available technologies indicated that missing persons were in specific locations, but physical searches of those areas revealed no human presence. Thermal equipment showed signatures that matched human bodies, sonar systems detected movement in underground caves, and even sniffer dogs indicated recent presence, but physical investigation failed to locate any individuals, living or dead. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the accounts of survivors who managed to escape the influences of Mount Shasta have provided unique insights into what really happens during the final moments before people disappear, revealing experiences that bridge the gap between scientific evidence and phenomena that transcend current understanding. Comment below. Resources weren't enough. If you're also impressed by the amount of advanced technology and financial resources that have been employed to solve the mysteries of Mount Shasta, but which still haven't been able to explain or prevent the disappearances that continue to occur on that mountain. The accounts of survivors who managed to escape the influences of Mount Shasta have provided unique insights into what truly happens during the final moments before people disappear, revealing experiences that bridge the gap between scientific evidence and phenomena that transcend current understanding. The transformation in understanding the Mount Shasta phenomenon came through detailed interviews with approximately 15 people who experienced the same effects that led others to disappear, but managed to resist the influences and return to safety. The impact of survivor testimonies was profound because they provided first-hand descriptions of phenomena that researchers had only theorized based on circumstantial evidence. Jennifer Walsh, a 34-year-old experienced hiker, described her 2019 experience. "I was hiking on a trail I knew perfectly when suddenly I felt like I was in a completely different reality. The trees seemed to be moving in ways that didn't make sense, and I could hear voices calling my name coming from a direction where I knew there was no one." The journey through the accounts revealed extraordinary consistency in the descriptions of perceptual alterations that preceded episodes of extreme disorientation. Survivors reported that experiences began with subtle sensations of something wrong in the environment, followed by visual distortions that included impossible movements of stationary objects, alterations in distance perception that made familiar locations seem unrecognizable and even more disturbing, specific auditory hallucinations that included familiar voices calling from areas where there were definitely no people. The hidden truth about how some managed to survive when others did not emerged through detailed analysis of the factors that allowed certain people to resist the influences that led to their disappearance. Michael Torres, a mountain guide who experienced a severe episode in 2020, explained that the key was recognizing that my perception was being altered and deliberately doing the opposite of what my brain was telling me to do. When I felt an irresistible urge to walk into the forest, I forced myself to sit and wait until the sensations passed. The survival mindset that characterized those who escaped included the ability to maintain metacognitive awareness that their own consciousness was being altered, even during episodes of severe disorientation. This ability appeared to be correlated with factors such as prior meditation, military training, or experience with medical conditions that required constant monitoring of altered mental states. The behind-the-scenes analysis of behavioral patterns during loss of reality experiences revealed that all individuals who experienced Mount Shasta influences went through predictable stages that began with subtle spatial disorientation and escalated into directional compulsions described as irresistible by those who succumbed to them. Lisa Chen, a survivor of a 2021 episode, described it as follows: "It was like something was literally pulling my mind in a specific direction. It wasn't just a thought of going to that area, it was a physical need that I felt throughout my body." The most disturbing revelations came from accounts of changes in time perception during episodes. Survivors consistently reported that experiences that lasted minutes seemed to last hours, or conversely, periods that seemed momentary actually lasted several hours, according to clocks and witnesses. David Rodriguez, who experienced an episode in 2022, reported that, "I entered an area at 2 p.m., and I remember having experiences that seemed to last all day. But when I managed to leave, it was only 2:15 p.m. The decision by some survivors to use specific techniques to maintain grounding in reality revealed strategies that could potentially save the lives of future visitors. Successful techniques included obsessive focus on tangible physical objects such as watches or equipment, verbal repetition of factual information such as names and addresses, and even more effective painful physical contact such as pinching or biting that seem to interrupt altered states of consciousness. The shift in understanding about resistance to influences included the discovery that people with certain neurological conditions or who were taking specific medications appeared to be less susceptible to the effects. Survivors who were taking medication for anxiety, depression, or neurological conditions reported that experiences were less intense or more easily resisted, suggesting that brain neurochemistry may influence susceptibility to the electromagnetic fields of Mount Shasta. The most hopeful evidence came from survivors who developed personal protocols for visiting Mount Shasta with relative safety. These protocols included visiting only during specific weather conditions, completely avoiding the 3 identified hot zones, carrying anchoring equipment such as constant noise devices or objects with distinctive textures, and most importantly, never visiting the mountain alone, always maintaining physical or visual contact with companions. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the perspective of the local community living in the shadow of Mount Shasta has revealed aspects of how generations of residents have learned to coexist with a phenomenon that transcends scientific understanding, developing informal traditions and protocols that reflect knowledge accumulated over decades of living with the inexplicable. The perspective of the local community living in the shadow of Mount Shasta revealed aspects of how generations of residents have learned to coexist with a phenomenon that transcends scientific understanding, developing informal traditions and protocols that reflect knowledge accumulated over decades of living with the inexplicable. The transformation in the mindset of the local residents happened gradually as each generation passed on to the next, not only stories about disappearances, but practical strategies for living in a region where the most prominent mountain holds secrets that no one can fully explain. The impact of the mountain's sinister reputation on the community's daily life is complex and nuanced, reflecting decades of adaptation to a reality that balances local pride with awareness of genuine dangers. Helen Morrison, who was born and raised in Mount Shasta City 67 years ago, explains that you grow up knowing that our mountain is special in ways that are both beautiful and dangerous. We learn from a young age which areas to avoid, when not to climb, and how to recognize signs that something is wrong. The journey through theories and legends passed down through generations revealed local knowledge that transcends both superficial folklore and conventional scientific explanations. Families who have lived in the region for 3 or 4 generations have developed detailed oral traditions that include not only stories about disappearances, but observations about seasonal patterns, weather conditions, and even animal behaviors that precede periods when the mountain becomes particularly active. The hidden truth about local knowledge is that it incorporates decades of empirical observation that rivals scientific studies in precision, but utilizes cultural language and frameworks of understanding that differ drastically from academic approaches. Robert Chen, whose family has run a mountain equipment store for 3 generations, revealed that we keep informal records of when people feel strange in the mountains. It's not scientific, but the patterns are consistent. Certain weeks of the year, certain weather conditions, you just don't go up. The economic mindset of the local community reflects a constant tension between dependence on mountain-related tourism and the responsibility to protect visitors from dangers they cannot adequately explain. The local economy generates approximately $80 million annually through activities related to Mount Shasta, including lodging, guides, equipment, and spiritual events that attract visitors from around the world seeking transformative experiences on the sacred mountain. Behind the scenes, the impact on tourism includes careful communication strategies that inform visitors about safety precautions without creating panic or discouraging responsible visitation. Lisa Rodriguez, who has worked at the Tourist Information Center for 15 years, explains that we've developed ways to educate people about real risks without sounding like we're making up stories. We talk about emergency preparedness, the importance of not traveling alone, and areas that require specialized expertise. Revelations about local volunteer search groups have shown that the community has developed emergency response capabilities that complement official efforts, but have also revealed unofficial findings that authorities prefer not to publicize. The Mount Shasta Watch group, formed by local residents in 1998, keeps detailed records of anomalies, strange sightings, and patterns that do not appear in official reports because they transcend conventional categories of evidence. The decision by community members to form independent search groups was motivated both by a desire to help families in crisis and by frustration with the limitations of official investigations, which often ended with cases being classified as unexplained accidents without adequately exploring possibilities that transcend conventional categories. James Martinez, a founding member of Mount Shasta Watch, noted that authorities do the best they can with the tools they have, but there are aspects of these cases that require different approaches. The transformation in volunteer strategy included the development of unconventional protocols that incorporate both scientific knowledge and local and indigenous traditions. Volunteer search groups collaborate with tribal elders, use non-standardized electromagnetic detection equipment, and employ investigative techniques that official authorities cannot use due to legal or procedural constraints. The most significant unofficial findings include documentation of correlations between disappearances and activities at nearby military facilities, patterns of wildlife behavior that precede periods of high anomalous activity, and physical evidence suggesting that some disappearances may be related to phenomena that transcend current scientific understanding, but can be monitored and potentially predicted through careful observation of environmental indicators. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because some of the most emblematic cases that have never been solved reveal aspects of Mount Shasta that transcend individual disappearances and suggest that we are dealing with phenomena that challenge our fundamental understanding of how reality works in certain locations that seem to operate according to rules different from those that govern most places. Comment below. The community knows best. If you're also noticing that local residents who have lived for generations in the shadow of Mount Shasta have developed knowledge and strategies that official authorities can't access through conventional methods, but which may be crucial to understanding what really happens on that mountain. Some of the most emblematic unsolved cases reveal aspects of Mount Shasta that transcend individual disappearances and suggest that we are dealing with phenomena that challenge our fundamental understanding of how reality works in certain locations that seem to operate according to different rules than those governing most places. The transformation in the Mount Shasta investigation can be traced back to one specific case that set the standard for all subsequent mysteries: the disappearance of Dr. Richard Ashford in September 1960, which became the first documented case to exhibit characteristics that we now recognize as the signature of the Mount Shasta phenomenon. The impact of the Ashford case was profound, not only because it marked the beginning of systematic records of disappearances on the mountain, but because it established investigative precedents that continue to influence official approaches more than 6 decades later. Dr. Ashford, a 45-year-old geologist from the University of Berkeley, had gone to Mount Shasta to conduct research on subterranean volcanic activity when he disappeared during ideal weather conditions, leaving behind intact scientific equipment and detailed notes that ended abruptly mid-sentence. The journey through the details of the Ashford case revealed aspects that would become recurring characteristics in decades of subsequent disappearances. His last scientific notes described electromagnetic anomalies that defy current understanding and mentioned effects on perception that require further investigation. Even more disturbing, his electromagnetic measuring instruments were found recording data that were physically impossible according to the scientific knowledge of the time, but which corresponded precisely to the anomalies that modern researchers would identify in the 3 hot zones decades later. The hidden truth about cases with contradictory physical evidence emerges when we analyze situations where multiple lines of evidence point to mutually exclusive conclusions. The case of Maria Santos in 1987 exemplifies this category. A biology teacher experienced in mountaineering who disappeared during a solo hike documented by multiple trail cameras, but whose belongings were subsequently found in 3 separate locations that were impossible to reach during the time frame of the disappearance. The investigative mindset had to adapt when forensic evidence in the Santos case revealed that her footprints appeared in locations requiring technical climbing skills she lacked. Her personal belongings were found at altitudes witnesses testified she had never visited, and DNA analysis confirmed her presence in areas where GPS data from her cell phone proved she had never been. Each piece of evidence was individually valid, but collectively they created a narrative that was logically impossible. The behind-the-scenes story of the family's relentless search revealed dedication and resourcefulness that transcended the limitations of official investigations. The Patterson family, whose son David disappeared in 1995, spent over $300,000 over 2 decades hiring private investigators, psychics, specialists in anomalous phenomena, and even indigenous shamans in an attempt to discover what happened to their 23-year-old son, who disappeared during a routine photographic expedition. The revelations about the family's dedication include discoveries that official authorities were unable or unwilling to pursue. Margaret Patterson, David's mother, explained that we found evidence suggesting that David had discovered something significant about the mountain in the days before he disappeared. His last photographs showed formations and phenomena that geology officials said were impossible, but the images were authentic and dated. The decision by some families to form informal alliances created networks of information sharing that transcended individual cases. The group Families for Mount Shasta Truth, established in 2003, connected relatives of victims across decades and revealed patterns that individual investigations had missed. Through collaborative analysis of seemingly unrelated cases, families discovered correlations between disappearances and factors such as solar activity, seismic events, and even military exercises at nearby facilities. The shift in official attitude toward prematurely archiving cases reflected recognition that Mount Shasta cases did not fit into conventional categories that allowed for normal investigative closure. Official files revealed that archive decisions were often based not on evidence of death or resolution, but on recognition that available investigative tools were inadequate for the phenomena the cases presented. Evidence regarding why some cases were prematurely closed includes documentation of political and economic pressure to minimize public awareness of patterns that could affect local tourism. Internal memos revealed that officials recognized that continued investigation of certain cases could create public panic, disproportionate to actual risks, and that prolonged media attention on anomalous aspects could damage economic interests that depend on mountain tourism. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because more than 6 decades after the first documented disappearance on Mount Shasta, we have reached the point where we must confront the fundamental questions that all these cases raise about the nature of reality, the limits of our scientific understanding, and what it means to live in a world where certain places seem to operate according to rules that transcend our current comprehension. More than 6 decades after the first documented disappearance on Mount Shasta, we have reached the point of confronting the fundamental questions that all these cases raise about the nature of reality, the limits of our scientific understanding, and what it means to live in a world where certain places seem to operate according to rules that transcend our current comprehension. The most profound transformation that Mount Shasta provokes is not merely about statistics of missing persons or electromagnetic anomalies, but about our capacity to accept that there are aspects of the natural world that can permanently transcend conventional scientific explanation. Mount Shasta continues to attract thousands of visitors seeking spiritual experiences and outdoor adventures, maintaining its reputation as a premier destination for those seeking transcendence through connection with one of North America's most mystically significant mountains. But behind its majestic beauty and atmosphere of spiritual serenity, the mountain holds secrets that challenge our understanding of how people can simply disappear in the 21st century, leaving behind evidence that creates more questions than answers. The lasting impact of Mount Shasta's mysteries on public perception of wilderness safety has been profound, but it has also revealed fundamental tensions between our desire for adventure and our need for predictability and control. For the thousands of visitors who experience the mountain without incident each year, Mount Shasta represents spiritual fulfillment and connection with natural power. However, for the more than 30 families who have lost loved ones in the region over 6 decades, Mount Shasta is not a sacred place. It is a mystery that cries out for answers that may never come. The journey through decades of investigation has revealed that Mount Shasta forces a confrontation with the limitations of our scientific understanding and our capacity to accept phenomena that transcend current explanatory frameworks. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who spent 2 decades studying electromagnetic anomalies in the region, observed that Mount Shasta challenges our fundamental assumptions about how reality works. We can measure effects, document patterns, and predict behaviors, but the underlying mechanism remains genuinely mysterious. The hidden truth about Mount Shasta is that it represents an intersection between multiple domains of human experience, spiritual, scientific, cultural, and experiential, that rarely converge so dramatically. Traditional indigenous knowledge, modern scientific research, first-hand survivor accounts, and family testimony all point toward the recognition that something extraordinary is operating on the mountain, even if disagreement remains about the exact nature of this phenomenon. The mindset needed to process a mystery like Mount Shasta requires a balance between healthy skepticism and openness to possibilities that transcend conventional explanation. Scientific investigation can provide partial understanding through documentation of electromagnetic effects, analysis of behavioral patterns, and mapping of geographical correlations. But ultimate questions about why people disappear and where they go may transcend scientific methodology. The ongoing investigation involves recognizing that Mount Shasta cases require a multidisciplinary approach that incorporates not only traditional scientific methods, but also indigenous knowledge, psychological research, and even consideration of possibilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. Future research directions include collaboration between scientists, tribal elders, families of missing persons, and experts in anomalous phenomena. The most important revelation that emerges from the Mount Shasta investigation is that the mystery itself may be more significant than the solution. The mountain forces recognition that the world contains phenomena that transcend our current understanding, and that humility about the limits of our knowledge may be a more appropriate response than insistence on a complete explanation. The decision on how to respond to the Mount Shasta mystery reflects broader questions about how society deals with phenomena that challenge established paradigms. An approach that balances scientific rigor with openness to extraordinary possibilities, that respects both rational inquiry and traditional knowledge, and that prioritizes the safety of visitors while acknowledging genuine mysteries may represent an evolution in our approach to understanding complex phenomena. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because Mount Shasta ultimately leaves us with collective responsibilities, both to honor the memory of those who disappeared and to support families who continue seeking answers, and to maintain vigilance over phenomena that remind us that the world contains mysteries that transcend our current capacity for complete understanding. Write this down. Mount Shasta changed everything. If you also feel that this mystery represents more than just individual cases of missing people, but a window into aspects of reality that challenge our fundamental understanding of how the world works and what may be possible in places where natural laws seem to operate differently, Mount Shasta ultimately leaves us with collective responsibilities, both to honor the memory of those who disappeared and to support families who continue to seek answers, and to remain vigilant about phenomena that remind us that the world contains mysteries that transcend our current capacity for complete understanding. What strikes me most about this investigation is how Mount Shasta represents something much larger than individual cases of missing persons. It's a window into aspects of reality that challenge our fundamental understanding of how the world works. More than 30 families lost loved ones on a mountain that should be a sanctuary of natural beauty and spiritual growth, but which has revealed itself to hold secrets that transcend current scientific explanation. The courage of the survivors in sharing their experiences the tireless dedication of the families in seeking answers, and the humility of scientists in acknowledging the limits of their knowledge combine to create a portrait of humanity facing the genuinely inexplicable. Mount Shasta forces us to confront the possibility that our world contains phenomena that may permanently transcend our understanding, but which still deserve our attention, respect, and continued investigation. Perhaps the most important lesson to emerge from decades of mysteries at Mount Shasta is that mystery itself has value independent of its solution. The mountain teaches us humility about the limits of our knowledge and reminds us that wonder and reverence can coexist with scientific inquiry and rational investigation. If you've made it this far with me on this journey through one of America's most genuinely perplexing geographical mysteries, you understand that Mount Shasta represents much more than statistical anomalies or scientific theories. It's a place where reality seems to operate according to rules different from those that govern our everyday experience. Comment below. Mystery remains alive. If you also feel that Mount Shasta challenges us to accept that some aspects of the natural world may permanently transcend our capacity for complete explanation. Click like if you value this type of research that explores genuinely extraordinary phenomena with both scientific rigor and openness to possibilities that transcend conventional paradigms. It is this engagement that allows me to continue dedicating time to detailed research and collaboration with experts in multiple disciplines to bring clarity to mysteries that challenge our fundamental understanding of reality. If you want to continue exploring these places where the inexplicable meets the documented, subscribe to the channel, because every week I bring you case studies that show how our world contains phenomena that transcend conventional categories of understanding. There's a video over here about the Bridge of Lost Souls. Click on it and continue watching, because the world of geographical mysteries is much more widespread than most people imagine.